Okay, coming back to this. On this chi-square test, we're looking just at the chi-square. We want to know, is there a difference between males and females in terms of whether or not they'd marry their same spouse again? Because this is less than 0.05, then we can say, yes, there is a significant difference. Because we know that women was higher in the area where they would choose somebody different, we can also say there's a difference, and the difference is that more women would do that. So that's two categories. Well, what if we had more than two categories? So, for example, if a researcher were interested in how American college graduates and high school graduates were asked how they kept up with the news, and also was interested in the same question in Japan, he might do something like this. We have American college graduates and high school graduates, and how we asked them how they kept up with the news. And their options were newspaper, radio, or TV, and whether or not they're a high school graduate or college graduate. So we have the numbers here. And we also have this organized by whether or not they are from Japan. So we have high school and college graduates, newspaper, radio, and TV. So the other category we'd have to add to this is, are you American or Japanese? So the American could be one, Japanese two. So that's the way that we could categorize that. And everything else would be loaded into that same set of criteria. So we end up with something like this. For Americans, high school graduates, 80% of them get their information from television, while with college graduates, about the same percentage get their news from television. So we can see that college graduates use the newspaper to get their information more than high school graduates do. Moving on, when we look in Japan, we can see that Japanese college graduates use the newspaper the most to get their news, while high school graduates in Japan don't use the newspaper as much. So the question we want to know is there a pattern to this? Does the country that one is in make a difference in regard to where they get their news from, in addition to whether or not they're a high school or college graduate? So the question, that's what our question is that enough just to look at those tables? No, because sometimes the numbers are deceiving. So you end up with a table that looks like this. In America, because this is not less than 0.05 for this Pearson chi-square, that means that the way you get your news does not have anything to do with your level of your education. However, in Japan, it appears that education does make a difference, but in the United States it doesn't. This Kramer's V is just another type of test. It still ends up showing you the same thing, but you may come across this. It's just a different type of statistical test that some people use. The problem with those examples that I just gave you is we know there's a difference, but we may not be sure where the difference is. So we can use post hoc tests with all these and with all these as well, kind of like what we did with an ANOVA to determine where the differences are. To show you some examples, there is an article included in your materials called the Firstborn Preference, and it asks some questions about whether or not people have a preference over the gender of their child depending upon their own gender. And this is described here in the abstract and who they studied. And they also wanted to know, if you had the ability to select the gender, would you do that? So there's a description of it, and we scroll down through here, and it tells us what their method is and the procedure they went through. They gave a survey and attitudes towards technology. But here's the part that I want you to look at. Number of male and female students who indicated that they preferred a boy or girl or had no preference with respect to the sex of the first child is shown in Table 1. Roll down here and see Table 1. The chi-square that they used yield a significant overall preference for boys. It means boys were picked more often, with male participants choosing boys significantly more than female participants. So here's the male participants, here's the female, and they preferred the males preferred boys more than women. And the boy was selected more often than the girl. What I want you to notice in this is this little symbol right here. This is called a chi-square. Sometimes it will just give you that funny looking X. Sometimes it'll say chi-square. It just kind of depends on how you look at it. But basically, rather than giving you a table with these chi-square results, they're just showing you a verbal description of what those are. But you can still go through here and figure out what you need to know. The second part of this is willingness to use sex selection technology is done in the second table, and all they did is they give you the raw scores from this. Is how many boys, how many would choose girls. But you actually have to do some reading in here, and it says there was a significant difference between African American and white students in their willingness to use SST. That's not information that they provide to you in this table, so you kind of have to take their word at it that what they wrote is accurate, because they didn't include the tables for that. So that's just an example of a chi-square. They usually are pretty simple to understand, and in fact all the other stuff that we'll look at from here on out generally is pretty easy to understand. That wraps up this chapter 17.